And answers. You have about 50 minutes of that. As usual, please state your name and affiliation. Come up to the microphone and state on, please.
Thank you. My name is Stefano Carrera for the Italian Economic Daily, Solo 24 Ore. I have two questions. Today, it was a macro surprise. So the GDP of third quarter was revised down. And the expectation was, especially Nomura and some other analysts, the expectation was that for being revised up. So, do you think there will be some effect on the elections? Because, for instance, Nomura was forecasting a positive growth. So, Abe should have claimed that Japan is not in recession, but this is not the case. And the second question is, last Monday, the American rating agency Moody's downgraded Japan at a level lower than China and Korea. I was expecting to read in the Japanese press emphasizing this, but actually what I was able to read was just that Japan is only better than Italy. I mean, they just... but they didn't emphasize that the level now is lower than China and Korea. So my question is, do you think that there is also a growing tendency, also in the mainstream media, not to emphasize bad news? So for instance, you need 3 days ago, Standard & Poor's downgraded Italy, and it was like a national drama, and it was, the front page in every newspaper. So just, thank you.
Whom is your question to, Stefano?
No, the question is...
Are you asking both of them? Or?
Yes, both.
Okay.
Yes.
最初の方の質問に答えます。私もですね、この改定値は、マイナス 1.6% からおそらくマイナス 0.7 とか8、多少改善されると、改定値がですね、という予測を持っています。マーケット関係者も大体そのような見方をしていたようです。その意味では、はるかに下回る改定値が出たことは、安倍政権にとってもちろんマイナス材料になることは事実です。しかしながらですね、もう選挙戦は終盤に入っておいて、ここまで安倍自民党および公明党もですね、相当議席を伸ばしますが、自公を合わせてですね、先ほども申し上げたように4分の3、8割近い議席を取ることは今やもう押しとどめるような力は外的な要因によってですね、ないと思われます。ですから、今の質問の位置については、あまり大きな影響はない。ただし、それは、政府の経済政策プランナーやメーカーにとっては、相当ショックな数字であったことは間違いない。
In regard to your first question, I also had not expected the figures to be so bad. In fact, I thought that the original estimates, which would be minus 1.6%, would be actually revised upwards to 0.7 or 0.8, minus 0.7 or 0.8%. I think I shared similar views to many people in the markets. So in that sense, the actual figures that were announced were quite shocking. And yes, of course, that is something that would be negatively, adversely affect Prime Minister Abe's administration. But having said this, however, we're already in the campaign process. In fact, we're nearing the end of the campaign process. And as I've said earlier, the LDP and the Komito also will be increasing its number of seats. Probably together they will be able to get about nearly 80% of the seats in the House of Representatives, nearly 3/4 of the seats. And I think there is not going to be any outside factor, even negative economic data like this, that can stop that huge momentum that is already occurring. Of course, the people who prepared economic policy under Mr. Abe probably are very shocked by these results.
Following up on that, the problem is of course that the DPJ has been saying that Abenomics doesn't work. So its point was proven, and so that the results are all along their lines of argument. Why is that not good for them? Because they don't have anything to offer as an alternative, unfortunately. They don't have Abenomics Light or Abenomics Revised. They have the same economic program that they were presenting in 2003 and 2005 and in 2009. they're not caught up with the times. They certainly have not up to date in terms of the situation that exists in the world, with most economies down toward the zero bound. So they can't really capitalize, even though they were right all along, is what they could say. And also, he's right, it's too close to the election now. There is no way that you're going to get 10% more voters to go to the polls, which is what the DPJ needs to do better, and what the Ishimoto need to do better. They have to have 10 million people who are planning not to go suddenly get up out of their wherever they were, I guess their bathtubs, and say, hey, wow, I really should go vote. And they're just, it's not enough to get them there. Admittedly, this has been the fall of surprises in terms of economics. We had the significantly lower GDP figure on October 18th than everyone thought. We had the GPIF and the Bank of Japan surprising everybody on October the 31st with their expansionist and revisionist work. We also had, well, the today's figures, which again, surprise after surprise after surprise, and yet we're not seeing we've not seen the voters turn because of these surprises, and it's just not likely that they're going to turn with this last one. As for the Moody's downgrade, why don't they talk about South Korea and China? Because, well, you don't want to talk about South Korea and China. And it was, when Japan's rating fell below Botswana, that was news. And that was, even though Botswana is a wonderfully managed country, especially as compared to this one, this was shocking that an African nation would be worth, its bonds would be more worthwhile than Japanese bonds. But considering that everyone has watched the value of the yen plummet, has watched other countries go through trauma, I don't think there was really any sense that falling behind China, behind South Korea is really a significant figure. However, you're right. It is interesting that they did bring up Italy.
Daniel on the back there.
Daniel Leusink at Financial Dagblad, the Financial Daily from Holland. Perhaps the elephant in the room is the relative decline of Japan's economy vis-a-vis other Asian economies, such as South Korea and China. How much political capital do you think Abe is willing to invest in the conclusion of the TPP deal after the election? And let's assume that a deal is reached in the first half of next year. How much opposition would Abe face inside the LDP over a TPP deal, and how would that influence his likely victory or likely outcome of the presidential election inside the LDP in September next year? Thank you. And my question is for either speaker who wants to take it.
Thank you, Mr. Leusink. What we can't be absolutely certain about is whether this victory that is coming his way will make Mr. Abe more cynical or less cynical than he already is. And that's significant in terms of the TPP, because I often circulate the section from his book called Mizuho no Kuni, from his book of 2013, Tarashii Kuni e, Toward a New Country, where he describes the ideal Japanese economy as he sees it, as being a reflection, literally, of the rice fields in his father's native district. That, looking at the rice paddies, the moon reflected in them, and thinking about how all the villagers worked together, and if one of them got sick, the others would help in, and all this kind of very romanticized view, which he seems to have extended to all participants within the Japanese economy, so that major corporations will naturally help their employees, because we're all part of the Mizuho no Kuni, we're all part of the land of lush rice fields. because it's just natural that we help each other out. This kind of romanticism that he has expressed, that is immediately attacked by the TPP. And the TPP attacks rice most importantly, and nothing is more important to an imperial nationalist like Abe Shinzo than rice culture. And imperial nationalism is not my term, by the way. That's Inoguchi Takashi's terminology from his book on Japanese politics. You can look it up if you think it's a hysterical term. It's one of several different kinds of nationalism. And Abe Shinzo's professed vision of rice agriculture and the protection thereof and its importance to the soul of Japan is a precise reflection of Inoguchi's imperial nationalism as he described it. So for TPP, it's a tough call. It makes perfect sense in terms of economics, but you may have noticed that Mr. Toshikawa spoke not one word about economics in terms of Abe's planning for the next 6 years. And economics sort of rules the roost most of the time in most countries. It sort of runs things. So that Abe Shinzo may be very focused on the exact wording of his Abe Danwa, his Abe statement at the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. But there are going to be things that world markets are going to be deciding for him that might affect the way he writes that thing and the way it comes out and the way it's interpreted around the world, that he should better pay attention to rather than his 6 years looking ahead than simply just saying, oh, well, it's okay. I have a plan for constitutional revision and economics. I'll have Hamada-san and Mr. Kuroda take care of it. He'll have to make some decisions, and TPP is one of them.
Do you want to add something, please?
政治的な意味において今の質問に答えますと、今やその可能性は皆無になったんですが、仮に自民党が議席を現有の295から20ぐらい減ずる、つまりマイナスになるといった時には党内、いわゆる紛争、党内政局が発生していたのは事実ですね。その際の最大のポイントは実は TPP 問題なんですね。しかしながらですね、安倍さんは強運の持ち主でですね、300をクリアする。そして同時に、3次改造内閣をおそらくクリスマス12月25日に立ち上げると思いますが、その際にですね、数人の閣僚交代をします。もともと自民党の中にあっては、防衛政策通とされて、新しく小野寺さんの後を継いだ江戸さんという人が、今防衛大臣兼安全保障法制担当大臣です。しかしながら彼は短い期間の国会答弁でもその能力がないことが明らかになったんですね。加えてメディアで叩かれた政治とお金の問題があります。彼はくぶくり 99% 間違いなくクビになります。おそらくですね、後任は小野寺さんが再復帰するか、安倍さんは非常に、冷理冷徹な人ですから、林芳正さんを防衛大臣兼厚生担当大臣にする可能性、そのいずれかだと。問題は TPP なんですね。マイナス20にならないどころか増やす勢いですから、本来西川現農水大臣は続投なんですけれども、彼もまた、選挙区で政治とのお金の問題で、不適切な記述があったことが明るみに出て、これが来年の通常国会で野党の攻撃材料になる上にですね、おそらく実力で今回の総選挙で戦ってもですね、負けてしまう可能性なんですね。ですから安倍さんは彼を首切らなくても自動的にバッジを失う可能性が高いわけですから、次の農水大臣を決めることができる。実はこの TPP の残った交渉、短い期間で特にアメリカとの関係で誰ができるかということになると非常に適任者がいないんですね。一人アメリカかなり厳しく、豚肉のアメリカからすれば輸出問題ですが、強い調子で言ってきているんですが、我が国の 豚肉族って言われるんですね。豚肉族ですね。族議員の、鹿児島出身の森山博っていうのがいます。彼はもともと政治引退した青木元官房長官の直系です。もともとは経政会だったんですね。つまり旧竹下派属だったんですが、現在はですね、石原伸晃の石原グループに、属しております。彼を起用するか、一気に若返りだと同じ九州の農水族の江藤拓という、まだ43歳だったと思うんですが、このいずれしか、つまり大臣が国会での答弁ができるという意味ですよ。できる人材がいないんですね。で、唯一安倍さんにとって悩みの種は、その2人のうちどちらを起用するにしてもですね、TPP 交渉については、その大臣イニシアチブでとてもできそうにもないことが一番安倍さんにとっては、悩みの種だと思いますね。25日まで、今の質問に直接の答えになってませんけれども、今や安倍さんにとってはですね、TPP はもう大きなプレッシャー材料に政治的にですね、なっていないという判断をしているのが本音だと思います。ちょっと長くなります。
Speaking from a political point of view, I think if things had been different, we would have had a slightly different conversation about the TPP. In other words, if the LDP were to have lost maybe 20 of its 295 current seats, then there probably would have been discontent within the party, and there would have been a political situation that had arisen within the LDP, and the biggest problem or the biggest issue that might have come up would have been the TPP. However, as has been mentioned over and over again, Prime Minister Abe is pretty much assured of being able to have a tremendous victory for the LDP in the upcoming elections, probably over 300 seats. And so as a result, what are some of the things that are facing him as he winds up things after the election? First of all, he will be announcing his third cabinet. There will be a cabinet reshuffle probably on Christmas Day on December 25th. And there are several things that need to be decided. Probably there will be a change in some of the ministers, the makeup of the cabinet. First of all, in regard to the Minister of Defense, Mr. Onodera was replaced by a man named Mr. Ito, who is also in charge of not only the Minister of Defense, but he is also the minister in charge of security, legal matters, systems. However, he has been pulled before the Diet several times, and it has been very apparent that he does not have the capacity to be able to respond in an adequate way in front of the Diet. So there's a 99% chance that he will probably lose his ministerial post in the cabinet reshuffle. So who will he be replaced by? It could be possible that he will be replaced by his predecessor, Mr. Onodera, or it might be that he will be replaced by Mr. Hayashi, who is also an expert in defense matters. The other very large question, again, has to do with the TPP. It has to do with who will be the new agricultural minister. At present, it is Mr. Toshikawa who has worked hard on the TPP issue. And he also, however, has come under fire for some political inappropriate documentation in his home district. In other words, politics and money is going to become a big issue in the next Diet session, and he will be very much a target of opposition fire. However, even before that, in terms of his actual strength in his electoral district, there's a great possibility that even though the LDP will win big, he himself, Mr. Nishikawa, might lose his seat. So Prime Minister Abe will have to be spared the onerous task of firing him. He will probably be losing his seat and therefore the ministerial position altogether. In terms of the very limited amount of time remaining for the TPP negotiations, who is there in the LDP that could negotiate adequately with the United States? Frankly, the answer, sadly, is that there is no one that can negotiate satisfactorily. However, there are some possibilities of successors to Mr. Nishikawa as agricultural minister. One is that in the past there have been some good negotiations from the point of view of Japan in terms of pork imports from the United States. In other words, the negotiations were well handled by, we have apparently tribal pork meat, excuse me, tribal meat politicians, people who are experts in this field. And there was a man named Mr. Hiroshi Moriyama, who comes from Kagoshima, the southern island of Japan, who is actually directly connected with a former Diet member, Mr. Aoki. And he might be one person that would be this possible successor. He has deep political roots. Mr. Aoki has deep political roots. He was a member of Keisekai, Mr. Takeshita's faction. Mr. Moriyama, this younger person now, is a member of Nobuteru Ishihara's group at present. If this Mr. Moriyama is not chosen, another young person might be chosen. He also would be from Kyushu, the southernmost island. His name is Mr. Taku Eto. He is very young, only about 43 years old. In other words, these are the only two viable possibilities that we see as being replacements for Mr. Nishikawa as agricultural minister, because they would have the capacity, the ability to deliberate within the Diet and take questions from the opposition parties. However, having said this, however, neither of these potential ministers really have the great power and skill to change fundamentally the direction of the TPP negotiations. I believe that. So the conclusion that I can draw, because of the fact that Prime Minister Abe is going to get so many seats in the Diet, and because the TPP is not going to be a big issue within the LDP, the TPP for him is no longer a pressing issue.
I have a follow-up question here, because you mentioned that the ministers get grilled in Parliament, but with this overwhelming majority of the LDP, which role will Parliament have to play? Is it becoming a pure rubber stamp Parliament, or does it have anything to do? And with that, what role does the opposition have to play in the Parliament like that?
Well, I'll try a start on that one. The Diet interpellations are a show that is put on where very talented questioners will get on the evening news. Persons who find the right question to spike some minister or the Prime Minister himself will get exposure. And so, while the general sense is that it's hopeless, why keep trying? It will really depend on, first of all, the quality of the questioners, and secondly, the personality of Oshima Tadamori, who most likely will continue on as the chairman of the Budget Committee. His predecessor, Nikai Toshihiro, was very fair to the opposition and let them talk and let them debate. And in many ways, the falling in Abe's popularity was directly linkable to the ability of the opposition to get its licks in under Nikai's chairmanship. Oshima Tadamori's chairmanship is still somewhat ambiguous by comparison. Whether he is going to shut down the opposition or let them talk will really determine to what extent the Abe administration has scars going into the fall extraordinary session.
Okay, Haldun, please.
Thank you for your insights, Haldun and Panoramic News. Just follow up for Mr. Yoshikawa about the cabinet reshuffle. Last cabinet reshuffle was kind of very bad and embarrassing for Mr. Abe, and do you think now, in general, he will be more careful in selecting his ministers, like maybe running a national check-up on SM Club who attended or who didn't attend? And second question for Mr. Chuck. Mr. Abe was visiting, he visited over 50 countries, so this was unusual so far. So why do you think he's doing this kind of diplomatic visits, except of course Korea and China? So do you think he has some special goal, and do you expect him to continue this diplomatic mileage plus program? Thank you.
ですね、先ほど1月8日から15日に総理大臣の日程が空白になっているというふうに申し上げました。その時、ロシアと北朝鮮についての可能性を言及しましたが、実は今言われた通りにですね、韓国が残ってるんですよね。日中韓3カ国首脳会議というのはアニュアリーでずっと行われてきたのが、この1年8ヶ月ぐらいですか、実現できていないんですね。で、安倍さんはもともと非常に、個人的に韓国のパク・クネ大統領に対して、非常にネガティブな思いを持っておられてですね、自分の方からアクションを起こして日韓関係を修正する、改善するという意欲がなかったんですね。しかしながらさっきの APEC 会議での日中首脳会談がたとえ短時間にせよ実現したということで、今度は中国側からですね、韓国から、要請を受けたかどうか確認できませんが、日中韓3カ国首脳会談を可能な限り早くやろうということが、先にですね、谷地翔太郎国際安全保障局長兼内閣特別顧問と秋葉剛夫国際法局長が、安倍習近平会談実現の直前に北京で中国側と、共同4つの合意アグリメントを作りました。その文言協議でやってる際に、中国側の現在国務院、副首相級の楊潔チからですね、谷地さんはそのような要請を内々に受けている事実があります。したがってですね、日中韓首脳会談という形による、残された、2つプラス1、つまり3つですが、安倍さんにとっては安倍外交の仕上げ、当面の仕上げとして、近い時期にある。1月の先ほど言った空白の時期は、ロシアか北朝鮮だと思いますが、早ければ1月23日の召集前にですね、チェジュ島あたりで日韓首脳会談ということも、日中韓3カ国首脳会談を前提として実現する可能性はあります。
I mentioned earlier that there is this empty period in Prime Minister Abe's schedule from January 8th to 15th of next year. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that there will be a surprise development that will concern probably Russia or North Korea. The possibility there is very, very high. However, as you mentioned as part of your question, Prime Minister Abe has not been able to have any real relationship with South Korea. That is a big item that is left in his foreign policy. Until the past 1 year and 8 months, it used to be that the leaders of China, South Korea, and Japan would meet at least once a year, a three-country summit, and that has not been held for the last year and 8 months. Prime Minister Abe has very personal, strong feelings regarding Ms. Park in South Korea, and because of his very negative feelings towards her, he is very reluctant to initiate any action on his part to try to bring a rapprochement or to try to again bring some kind of a new development to that relationship. However, the fact is that Japan and China was able to have a summit meeting earlier this year. It was a very, very short summit meeting, but it was at least a summit meeting. And as a result, of course, we cannot confirm if China has therefore put some kind of pressure or some encouragement towards South Korea or not. However, there seems to be a movement afoot behind the scenes for the three countries together to have some kind of a summit meeting. There have been some indications in this regard. Mr. Yachi, who is the person in charge of international security affairs and is also an aide to Prime Minister Abe, and Mr. Akiba, who is in charge of international legal affairs or laws. These were the two people who went to China in advance of the Japan-China brief summit. And they had put together with their Chinese counterparts a 4-point agreement, 4 things that they agreed upon in advance. And during this negotiation for this 4-point agreement document, Mr. Yachi was approached by a member of the State Council in China, Yang Kechi, who was the foreign minister, foreign minister, of China, about somehow putting together, if not a direct summit meeting between South Korea and Japan, a 3-country summit meeting, and therefore that would allow Prime Minister Abe to resolve this one last remaining piece of his foreign policy efforts. So, as again, I mentioned, in January 18th to 15th period, I think there will be something developing between Japan and Russia, or Japan and North Korea. However, before the plenary session of the Diet is called on January 23, just before that, perhaps, there might be some kind of a meeting, maybe on Jeju Island, that would involve the leaders of the 2 countries, with the understanding that this would be, a forerunner, or something that would be before an actual 3-country summit meeting.
In answer to your first question, which has to do with the makeup of the cabinet, Mr. Abe has a very short window in which to work. We have the election on December the 14th, and basically the announcement on Christmas Day. He's only got 10 days in that regard. Of course, there are people whom he must be looking at already, or who have been already vetted. Nevertheless, he has a very delicate balance. If no one is changed, then this election for nothing really looks like an election for nothing. But any extra person that you add in, of course, carries with him or her the possibility that he or she is a time bomb in terms of political funding. The rules are very complex, and it's very easy to violate them, as Minister Matsushima found out with her fans. You can go too far without really appearing to have really done anything very bad. Now, in terms of this rapprochement possibly with South Korea, everything depends on securing that meeting, I think. If no meeting is secured, we have coming up on the 26th of December, the 1-year anniversary of his visit to Yasukuni. And Mr. Abe is still himself, and psychologically, I believe his visits to Yasukuni are very supportive of his balance, psychologically, and his sense of self. And to think that Hagiuga Koichi is basically his second brain, was wrong a few weeks back when he said, I think that Abe is going to Yasukuni this year. It is a big bet. And of course, if he goes to Yasukuni, he will have to live with the consequences, and Japan will have to live with the consequences. Of course, he can always say, you saw how well Xi Jinping received me, so I really didn't sacrifice very much. And there's a good argument there. The retreatment, many analysts see that the Chinese saw the entire meeting as demeaning to Japan and demeaning to Mr. Abe, and he deserved it. Well, he can return the favor. Finally, in terms of visiting 50 countries quickly, one, it shows that Japan is back on the world scene, which he desperately wants to establish that as a concept. Two, it shows that he's healthy and can keep up an absolutely manic schedule that no prime minister previously. Koizumi was the previous record holder, and he did it over 5 years. Abe's done it in a year and a half, beaten that record. And finally, this is fading now that we're getting farther and farther away from 2012, but he definitely wanted to create the impression that he was very different from the DPJ prime ministers, particularly Khan. Of course, he couldn't go anywhere because he was dealing with the immediate after effects of 3/11, but Noda basically never left the country and only went outside the country for international conferences. Did not do bilaterals at all. The Abe administration really clearly wanted to establish we're involved with the outside world. We're not stuck in Tokyo. We're not prisoners of our political program. things will happen domestically, fine. We have an international representative role.
Okay, Elaine, please.
Okay, at the risk of posing what may be seen as a naive question, can we draw any conclusions about the state of Japanese democracy from this event that's happening on Sunday? I mean, what does this tell us about, in the long run, which direction Japan is headed in politically? Thank you.
スピーチの中でも私は必ずしも安倍晋三さんの政治信条に賛成するものではないというよりもむしろネガティブな立ち位置にいます。
I referred to this in my speech, but in regard to Mr. Abe's political leanings, his political concepts and beliefs, I am not necessarily very much in favor of them. In fact, I'm, if anything, quite rather against them.
しかし、ファクトファインディングライターを辞任する私からすればですね、安倍自民党がここで315近い議席を獲得するとすれば、これまで言われていた安倍一強時代からですね、私はベビーブーマー世代ですから古い言葉になりますが、まさに安倍一強から安倍ファッションになると思いますね。つまり安倍独裁です。安倍さんが親しい、諸外国のトップ、ロシアのプーティン、先ほど出た、モンゴルのエルベクドルチ大統領、トルコのエルドアン、みんな独裁者です。独裁者とやっぱりケミストリーが合うんですよ、ですから個人的には、危惧しています。と私が FCCJ で話したと、今日中に官邸に入りますから、なかなか官邸をこれから私は訪れることができなくなるかもしれません。
But as a person who professionally professes that he is a fact-finding writer, I must admit to the truth that I see. Until now, we've been talking about the era of Prime Minister administration basically being an extremely mighty presence and everyone else being very, very small. But if Prime Minister Abe and his LDP win something like 315 seats in the Diet, then we're going to be entering a new phase in Japanese history. I'm part of the baby boomer generation. Perhaps these kinds of terms are perhaps a little bit old-fashioned, but I think we're not just going to be entering a phase. We're going to be getting away from a phase where it's the Prime Minister Abe administration being very, very dominant or strong, but rather we're going to be entering a new phase where we're going to see Abe fascism. And I know it's a very, very strong word, but it's really the authoritarian, autocratic kind of age that we're going to be seeing. Mr. Abe gets along with the rulers of several different nations. For example, Mr. Putin in Russia, the president of Mongolia, Mr. Erdogan, excuse me, and Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. All of these, are autocratic rulers. There seems to be a natural chemistry that arises between like-minded people. So, again, the fact that I'm making these very strong statements in a very public place in the FCCJ, probably my words will be conveyed to the Prime Minister's office today, so I may find it very, very difficult to find access to the Prime Minister's office in the future. However, I'm very concerned about this state of affairs.
Mr. Toshikawa's statement about like minds thinking together is not his necessarily. Mr. Abe's aides also have in the press have said that he does get along unusually well with the individuals whom he just listed. And the implication there is that they are indeed birds of a feather that flock together. In terms of this, the state of the first issue that has to be worked out is by political scientists. There's actually a rule in political science that says that SMDs result in two-party democracies, in single-member districts. It's an actual rule in this political science. So they're going to have to go back to the rule book and strike it out and say, except in Japan. But I am extremely hopeful that I'm made by this election. This election has resulted in people thinking seriously, particularly in the opposition parties. They thought seriously and acted seriously in reducing the number of districts where they were running candidates simultaneously. Within a period of 2 weeks, they were able to cut down in half from over 40 to down to 22, I think is the final number, of districts where the Ishinoto and the DPJ are both running candidates. That's really remarkable. As you know, negotiations here tend to drag on. I'm also very, very encouraged by the dissolution of parties that are personality-based. And their fate in this election will be obliteration. I count among them the Party of the Next Generations, which was basically an Ishihara vehicle, along with his friend Hiranuma Takao. That party is going to obliteration. We saw the half of the Your Party, which was basically a personality cult of Watanabe Yoshimi's. But when it turned out, the question that nobody in that party had ever asked is, you know, where is all this money coming from that pays for everything? And he never told them, and it turned out he was basically running what was a Ponzi scheme for a political gain, borrowing money left and right from all kinds of people and paying off loans with money he borrowed from other people, and eventually he got caught. That it came into the open that this was all based on borrowed money. None of which, of course, was recorded anywhere. Because so that was the problem. Not that he was borrowing money, but that he was not recording it anywhere. Those parties are gone, and that's a great development in Japanese politics. That these kind of parties are gone. The two parties that are left, the DPJ has a terrible leader. Mr. Kaeda's job, he did not understand this when he was elected by the other members of the DPJ. His job was to resign after the House of Council's election in 2013, just like all good party leaders do after they lead their party to defeat. He didn't do his job. He stayed on. And even in this summer, when other party leaders tried to get him to resign, please, please resign, he didn't do his job. Failure was what he was elected to do, and he couldn't even fail properly. He's going to hopefully lose in his district this election. He's had a really tough fight here in this, where we are sitting right now. And if he's defeated in this district election, he's gone as leader. And the best thing that the DPJ can hope for is to hit close to 100 seats. Kaeda loses his seat, he can resign, and the next person can build on what has happened. That is a very hopeful outcome right now. Right now, the DPJ is looking at a terrible, terrible election. But there is hope for the future. It's much better than it was a few weeks ago. We have, with the Ishinoto, we have two very good leaders. Hashimoto has cleaned up his act, and certainly Eda Kenji, who was here just last week, 2 weeks ago, he's a very impressive individual and will be an impressive individual going forward. And these are the ingredients for a much healthier Japanese politics than we have seen over the last 2 years.
Okay, then we have Karsten, please. It's probably going to be the last question. It's almost 2:30.
Carsten Games from Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung in Germany. I have two pictures of the Prime Minister listening to you. One is a realistic, quite rational acting politician. The other is a romantic rice field dreaming about history. As we all know, politics can't just do what it wants to do. You have to react on influence from outside. Economically, this might bring pressure, because everybody knows opening is one of the big problems of Japan. We talk about 20, 30, 40 years about it. Foreign investment will not come as long as there is no proper governance. the fiscal situation is getting worse, so the old Japanese politics of money printing and fiscal spending can't work for a longer time. So do you think this Prime Minister is understanding, willing and able to change the society, or is it just some branding like Womenomics? Just nice words but nothing happens. So do you expect he has a new majority, 2/3, and analysts say yes, now the big bang will come. They didn't get it the last time. Do you expect something to happen, or do you see the danger it will decline soon? And yes, Mr. Abe will be history even before he thinks. And the opposition, let's talk about content. DPJ and Ishin is Shoto, for me, it's a bit LDP light. So Western countries compared with Japan are completely different, but the two-party system always has some sort of more left-wing and more conservative. This does not work. The only left-wing party that survived is the communist, and I even met people that I never expected to tell me they will go communist this time. So isn't this just a structural problem, not just a problem of personal people?
I will go first and then Toshikawa speak for a second. In terms of your final point, the concept of there being left versus right wings, and left versus right parties, Abe has Womenomics, he has Akiya-sama going to the Gay Pride Day parade, and he takes advice directly from Paul Krugman. What's left? Yeah, and that's left with a big L, okay? There's nothing there. Mr. Xi is coming here this afternoon. He's going to get to talk about that tiny bit of the spectrum over here that's left for him and his party of the communists. For the most of the part, everything else is taken up there by the LDP. The DPJ has no place to stand in terms of left versus right, because the LDP is already there. It's covered all the bases. It has the most liberal economic program of any party anywhere in an OECD country. It is the left here. So that dichotomy doesn't have any real bearing to the way the economy is run. Now, in terms of the economic outlook, is that what you really want?
Whether the Prime Minister is really the rice field fan, ignores reality, or whether he will be willing to change.
Oh, then the question is, what's good change? You may remember that they had last June, or this June, the 230 plus elements of the third arrow. You disparaged the first and second arrow, saying that's old hat. The third arrow is where it's at, right? Well, the problem with the third arrow is structural reform is naturally deflationary. And the goal of this government and of Mr. Kuroda is inflation. If you're going, you can't have both. So that 230 item list has to be pulled apart and find which things have the least deflationary aspects to them, but still have a good structural reform component. And that, I don't see that effort being made.
私は残念ながら申し上げなければならないと思うのはですね、安倍自民党が大勝して、実は今まで一番構造改革、規制改革についてどの政権も小泉政権を含めてですね、成し得なかったのが厚生労働省所管と農水省所管の岩盤規制と言われるところに風穴を開けるということがこれまで誰もできなかったんですね。
Unfortunately, this is something that I don't want to say, but I must say, and that is that we're expecting Prime Minister Abe and LDP to win very, very big. But when we look at past efforts of strong leaders to try to effect reform, regulatory reform, structural reform, and I'm talking even about Prime Minister Koizumi's attempts at reform, the things that have not been really ever touched or really truly reformed are what we call the bedrock or ganban regulations that exist primarily in the welfare area and also the agricultural area.
安倍さんはですね、ですから第3次改造内閣を12月25日に立ち上げて来年の通常国会中にですね、この2つのサンクチャリーとされてきた省庁に対してかなり 鋭いメスを入れます。具体的に言えば、厚生労働省に対してはですね、上から目線で嫌いな人が多いと思いますけれども、塩崎康久厚生労働大臣ですね、彼の言う例えば GPIF のコーポレートガバナンス改革が本来先にやるべきにもかかわらず GPIF の資産運用の比率を特に国内株式と海外株式それぞれ17から25に上げたわけですね。こういうことに対してもともと塩崎さんは後先は逆だと主張していたんです。しかしながら官邸主導でとりあえず株価を上げるためにですね、水野博道という、イギリスのパートナー投資顧問会社の、パートナーを新しく設置したチーフインベストメントオフィサーに起用して、株価を上げるのに成功しておりますが、しかし岩盤に規制にですね、そういう規制に穴を開けるに至っていません。しかし塩崎はやる気十分です。問題は本来なら農水省マターなんですね。しかしもう今回選挙が終わっちゃったんですから、農協に JA に遠慮する必要がない。そういう意味ではおそらくですね、目に見える規制改革の果実というのはこれから1年以内に、国民の前に示されると思います。ますます安倍さんが強くなることで甚だ私としては不本意なんですけど、そのように予測します。でもう一つの質問について。
First of all, as I mentioned earlier, there are two areas in which we have not really been able to see any fundamental reform in the bedrock regulations that have been the most deep, strongest regulations in two sectors, the agricultural sector and also the health, labor, and welfare sector. And I believe these two ministries have until now been able to protect their own territories, but I think this will change as a result of the December 25th cabinet reshuffles. For example, just to give you some idea of what's going to be happening, I believe, is that in regard to the health, labor, and welfare area, Mr. Shiozaki is a politician who is disliked by many because he takes a very superior attitude, but he has been very, very critical about the reforms that were undertaken at the GPIF, the Government Pension Investment Fund. As you know, what was done to raise stock prices was basically to change the ratio of assets that were purchased by the GPIF, in other words, the ratio of their investments. They decided to raise the investment of domestic stocks from 17% to as high as 25%, and investments in foreign stocks from 17 to 25%. This was something that was done to raise stock prices. However, Mr. Shiozaki from the very beginning had said that was not the right thing to do first. The first thing that needed to be done was to do an overhaul of GPIF and to ensure that corporate governance really existed within this organization. However, because the need was in the Prime Minister's office to raise stock prices to help boost the economy as fast as possible, a man named Mr. Hiromichi Mizuno, who was a partner for a UK investment advisory firm, was designated a chief investment officer. And he made the decision to, again, change the ratio of investments carried out by the GPIF. However, after the elections, I believe that Mr. Shiozaki is going to be able to push through with his ideas, and there is going to be a radical overhaul of GPIF, in other words, strengthening corporate governance and basically making holes in these bedrock regulations in this area. In regard to the agricultural sector, after the elections are over and the LDP has won big, the LDP will not be indebted to, or will no longer have to be very, very cautious about its association with the JA system, the Japan Agricultural Cooperatives. As a result, I believe that this will be an opportunity for Prime Minister Abe to push through with fundamental reforms, regulatory reforms, and I think within the next year we're going to be seeing some startling, very major reforms in this area. We're going to see the fruits of some of his efforts. And this is going to be something that Prime Minister Abe is going to be able to do because he's going to only become stronger. I personally do not want him to become stronger, but I think these are some of the positive things that we would probably be seeing.
それから二大制度の話がちょっと出ましたけども、私個人は DPJ にもっともっと躍進してもらいたいのですが、実を踏まえて、現実を踏まえて言えばですね、 安倍晋三さんと麻生太郎さん2人のコンセンサスがですね、実は自民党の中を2つの巨大派閥にするということなんですね。つまり自民党の中に二大政党システムを作る。一つは安倍さんを中心としたコンサバティブ、今一つは麻生さんを中心としたモデレートコンサバティブ、あるいはリベラルコンサバティブ、名称はどうでもいいんですが、そういうものを作り、2人に共通しているのは安泰形成会、安泰田中竹下ファクションです。ですからこれから来年の統一地方選挙、再来年の夏の参院選挙通じて形成会、今の額賀派ですね、形成権といいますが、これをもう潰してしまうと極論すればですね。そして LDP の中に2パーティーズを作るというところまで実は恐ろしいことに考えてるんですよ。それが実現するかどうかは別ですよ。私は個人的に実現してほしくないんですけど、 LDP の中にリパブリカン、もう一つの民主党デモクラトということまで考えているということをちょっと頭の中に入れておいていただいた方がいいと思います。
I would just like to make a comment about the question of this two-party system being established in Japan. I personally would wish that the DPJ would work very, very hard and show much more dramatic growth. At the same time, I am aware of movements within and conversations that are being held within the LDP, and it seems that there is a growing consensus between Prime Minister Abe and Mr. Aso at present to create a two-party system within the LDP. In other words, to create two large factions within this larger party. One would be a faction that would be centered around Prime Minister Abe, who would call this a conservative party or conservative faction, and the other faction would be around Mr. Aso, and I don't know what you would call it, if you would call it moderate conservative or liberal conservative, but this idea is that they are both, these two factions, these two big organizations are joined by their common desire to crush the remnants of the Keisei-kai, the remnants of Mr. Tanaka, Mr. Takeshita's factions, who are now represented by Mr. Nukaga. In fact, in the upcoming regional elections that will be held throughout the nation next year, also in the House of Councillors election that will be held in the summer of next year, the goal of these two large factions is to destroy Mr. Nukaga and anyone that is remaining from the old Keisei-kai factions. Again, this is for me a terrifying idea, and I don't know if it will actually be realized or not, but these conversations are actually being held, so in the future we may have a Republican Party within the LDP and a Democratic Party within the LDP. I just want you to keep this possibility at least in mind.
Just to note, the DPJ can in some ways be denigrated as a breakaway Tanaka Keisei-kai faction, and that's always been one of its negatives, that it's basically a part of the LDP that broke off and is actually just a factional remnant. It's not even a broad-based party. In terms of, there was one error in what we've said today, and it was actually just a sort of a slip-up, and Mr. Toshikawa knows this. There was a statement that there needs to be a 2/3 majority of the people in terms of a constitutional amendment. That's of course not true. It's a 50% majority after there are 2/3 majorities in the House of Representatives and House of Councils. I just want to clarify that. We both know that. That's all.
Thank you very much for this. We have to break it up here because this room will be taken over by the communists in less than an hour. First, I can thank to both our speakers, and I actually can announce the first winner of this year's elections. Mr. Cucek extends his mandate as an honorary member of this club by another year. Thank you very much for coming. Mr. Toshikawa is a regular member, and he gets a more physical present for that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you. Have a nice evening.